On March 5th, 2012, FilmCourage.com had the opportunity to attend a press roundtable interview with Salmon Fishing in the Yemen screenwriter Simon Beaufoy. This audio is an excerpt of that press day. For more information on the film, please visit fishingintheyemen.com.
I like this. You're really teasing up something out of nothing.
Actually, we were discussing sort of some of the bigger themes involved in the book. He said the book was more about political satire, and you turned it into something a little more timeless. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, well, satire dates very quickly, doesn't it? And it was a sort of biting, angry response to the Tony Blair years of spin, really, where things were created out of nothing just for the press, effectively. And that dated very quickly. It's amazing in Britain how Tony Blair and his years were forgotten. Immediately he disappeared, and yet he was in power for ages. And satire does that. It's very relevant, and its edge is precisely because it's absolutely in the moment. And that worried me a lot. And also because it's got such a hard edge, it's a very difficult balance to have satire and a romantic story in the same film. The two sort of work against each other. The tone of satire is very unforgiving, whereas the tone of a romantic comedy is obviously quite soft-edged. So it was quite hard for me to work out the tone, and the only way I could see of doing it was to lessen the satire, really, because otherwise it just kills a romantic comedy off dead. Not necessarily a comedy, but certainly a romantic comedy.
Was it hard to keep a light touch to the whole story?
It's hard because of the satire. It was, yeah. And again, that was a case of just distancing it. Also, certainly for people in Britain, distancing it from the real people, which is why I turned the sort of press secretary into a woman, rather than in the book it's a man who's clearly based on a sort of Peter Mandelson type character. But I felt it was just a bit too easy and a bit. No, funnily enough, I wrote the full Monty about the Thatcher years, and by the time it came out, there had been 2 changes of government, and it was a different era altogether. So you have to be very careful with satire in films because it dates so fast.
I have to ask you, what did you think of the Iron Lady?
Interesting, very brilliant performance. Brilliant performance. I mean,
But in terms of like the way they handled her.
Well, in the end, I think it was the only way you could make a film about her was to turn her into an empathetic character by making her very fragile and vulnerable. On the other hand, I grew up in the industrial north where there's very little empathy about her, and nobody ever saw that in her at all. And that's what probably made her one of the great leaders of the 20th century, is that she had very little compassion for people and what they were going through, and for individuals. She was sort of an ideologist. So I was sort of conflicted about it because the screenwriter in me was saying, this is very clever, what they've done. This is possibly the only way you can make a film about this woman that people will want to watch, because you actually do feel for her, because she's a fragile human being at the end of her life. And the other half of me was going, yeah, but what about what happened to Sheffield, for instance? And with the stroke of a pen, she destroyed a huge swathe of British working culture. I mean, she turned the whole country away from being an industrial economy into a service economy. I mean, and many people would argue that was going to happen anyway, but it was done with great brutality. So that's a long answer to your short question. Conflicted is my one-word answer. That's what I think about the film.
You've written great stuff. Obviously, won the Oscar. Full Monty is amazingly hilarious. But I've got to wonder the kind of satisfaction that comes along with seeing Kristen Scott Thomas deliver some of the lines that you wrote for her.
Well, it's the only time in my life I've actually written for somebody. Because I learned early on in my life, if you write this for Robert De Niro, guess what? He's busy. He doesn't want to come to Yorkshire for 3 weeks on no money. So I learned never to write for people, but that was the one part. When I made the decision to make her a woman, I thought, I really, really want her to do it. Because she can be absolutely terrifying. And I wanted somebody terrifying. So I think she's very funny in it.
The line when she's yelling at her kid, I mean, really.
I'm not one of your bitches from the low-rise. The old low-rises,
Yeah.
No, well, you can imagine I had a lot of fun writing that, thinking of that cut crystal glass accent, saying those sort of things, yeah.
Was there anything from the book that you really wanted to keep but you couldn't?
Oh, gosh. There are certain little storylines that aren't there. I never really think about book adaptations like that, actually. And just you asking me that made me realise that. The main thing to keep, which I think is sacrosanct, is the tone and the spirit of the book, the sort of heart of it. And when I'm adapting a book, I always say to the author, everything's going to change, but I promise you that I will keep the spirit and the heart of your book the same. So it will feel the same to an audience, hopefully. I mean, that's the bit I feel is absolutely my duty to keep. Everything else, I'm afraid, is up for grabs because it's such a different medium that you have to be quite brutal with the things that happen. The characters and the heart of the book, the tone and the spirit, I feel need to remain the same. Sorry.
Okay. Simon, could you talk about your master of adaptation now?
Thank you. Can I put that on a letterhead? Sounds brilliant. Yeah, master of adaptation and genius of.
Yeah, I think it's being a screenwriter, you write original, but you're really good at the adaptation too. And which one is more pressure? And which one is more kind of you feel like being yourself? And do you want to go back to write the original screenplay?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to writing original screenplay just because I'm a bit scared that I can't do it anymore without someone else having a really good idea and turning it into a book.
Or write your book?
Oh, that's an idea. No, I think strangely my adaptations have worked because I've been very brutal with adapting them. But as I say, I hung on to what I thought was the most important thing about the book. But Slumdog Millionaire is a very free adaptation of the book Q&A. And this is fairly, I take some quite major liberties with Salmon Fishing, in that I bring back one of the characters from the dead. Robert dies very early on in the book, the Marine, which gave me great problems as an adaptation, because you think, well, if this is effectively a love triangle, otherwise what's to stop attractive Emily getting together with attractive Ewan on page 35? In the book, there's actually nothing that stands in their way. And it's sort of all right in the book, but in a film where you've got two people gradually falling in love with each other, you quickly lock yourself into a genre where people go, and? Get together, and suddenly my film sort of stopped around halfway. So I had to sort of keep Robert alive, if you like, in order to keep people examining the possibility and the problems of these two people getting together. So I guess my approach to adapting books is to treat them with a deep respect on one level, and at another level, park them to one side and go, I'm doing something completely different here.
Can you still do that with your current adaptation assignment?
No. That's a very good question. No, and interestingly, which I thought was going to be a problem, and it isn't actually. Because we're talking about Catching Fire. Yeah. Well, Suzanne Collins used to be a TV writer, so actually she'd done quite a lot of the work for me already. No, it's the one time I've not read the book twice and then put it to one side, which I do with them all. I never go back to them once I've read them a couple of times. With this one, I had to be a lot more faithful, also because there's a fan base who are more than usually keen that you get it absolutely right. And they have the Hunger Games fan base are passionate beyond anything I've ever come across. And I would fear for my life if I get that adaptation. If I do a 2-3 adaptation of that, I shall get firebombed. So I'm being very careful about that. Also, because Suzanne has been a film writer and a TV writer, she's already, funnily enough, she's already done a lot of adapting for me. Now, they'll cut my wage if you say that. but that's what I understood when I really got to grips with it, that actually she'd done a lot of my work for me already. Sorry, carry on.
Did you get to see any of the first movie to begin your work?
Yeah, no, I had to, yeah. I'm not going to tell you what happens. No, it's brilliant, it's really good.
But you can't, with a book adaptation, you can't obviously get everything in. Have you already talked to Suzanne about things that won't make it into the movie?
I think she's reading it possibly right now, the first draft. It could well be today. Yeah, I mean, she's involved a lot, and there will be things. I mean, she just knows her audience brilliantly, and she'll say, that bit you just can't cut out because they'll all go crazy. And other bits she'll go, this is fine, you can change this and that. But she really knows her readers. And because she's been in the film world, she understands about adapting and that things have to go and things have to change. So she's been fantastic to work with.
It's interesting. First movie is this movie, The Hunger Game, is about publicity kind of game. Publicity makes kind of people's view difference. So is that like you say you make this film more timeless, but it's right now I think it's more people kind of interesting kind of publicity work.
Oh, interesting. So I hadn't even connected those two things together. Yeah,
Do you see the world is kind of notice about the thing?
Well, it is. It's happening more and more that everything's driven by internet and publicity and people growing up desiring to be famous simply for being famous rather than for being actually any good at anything. I think, yeah, I hadn't actually noticed the connection between those two. Yeah, and the Hunger Games is a sort of brutal satire, but you don't even notice it's a satire really. A, because it's so brutal it's not funny, and B, because it's such an extraordinarily strong story that you're much more worried for the characters than you are examining it as a sort of a greater political satire about the TV world and how people have manipulate images to quell a population, if you like. But that's a really interesting thought, which hadn't occurred to me. I must be more stupid than I realised. Thank you. I shall now use that from now on as the main reason why I write films.
And the master.
Yeah, thank you, and the master,
I
yeah.
will listen to invoice.
Are there any elements of salmon fishing that you think are going to be more prone to being lost on kind of American audiences that aren't quite as familiar?
I haven't seen it play with an American audience yet. Humour's a really funny thing, isn't it? Some jokes just work one side of the Atlantic and they don't the other. But I've found over the years that they balance each other out. And some jokes that don't work in Britain, all American audiences love. Some things that I've written in British that in my English version that aren't even supposed to be funny get big laughs in America, and vice versa. So in the end, if there are enough jokes, it'll balance itself out. But I think humour just does play differently across the Atlantic.
Cool.
But I haven't seen it yet, so I don't know how it plays.
Anything else you're working on?
Is Kristen Scott Thomas funny?
Oh, very
Good.
The screening I was in, you had laughing like the whole time.
Yeah,
So,
perfect.
Yeah.
That's right.
I don't know, was it your decision or Lasso's to do the multi-split screen where she's in every single box?
That was last time. Yeah.
That's good. That was clever.
No, it was me. If it was good, it was me. Lass was on Skype and you couldn't understand the thing he said.
And it was Slumdog. You went to India, immersed yourself in the environment. Did you do anything like that for this?
I learned how to fly fish, which was an amazing thing to do, which I thought was really important to get myself in the head of the sheikh, really. And because in my head, fishing was all gear and tackle and floats and rods and huge amounts of stuff. And it never looked very relaxing to me. And then when I went fly fishing, I understood why it's a sort of metaphor for deep thinking and calm and sort of almost a faith in itself, because it's so simple. It's just a very bendy rod and a bit of nylon and a fly, and that's it. There is no more gear. And you just have to, over and over again, let out a bit more line. And you have to, if you're good at it, which I certainly am not, you have to think like the fish. You have to predict exactly where it's going to be in the water and exactly when it's going to come up and take a bite. Because you actually have to snatch the rod back before the fish has closed its mouth. It sounds impossible to do. And the only way of doing it is by getting into a sort of Zen-like state, where you just know when to snatch the rod back. And it happens before you've even seen the fish, like the thought of the fish coming, and you just know. So, I got nowhere near it, obviously. But the really good people, it is, watching a really, really good fly fisherman is an incredibly beautiful thing. Because the accuracy and the kind of foresight they have is very beautiful to watch.
Did you catch one?
Do you know what? I did. But only because it was the week of the mayfly. I don't know if you know anything about fishing, which I didn't. But the week of the mayfly is like an open all hours buffet for fish. It's these incredibly tasty fish that hatch for like 10 days in May. And the fish just go crazy. It's like, eat as much as you can. So it's really, really easy to catch a fish that week. And I did catch a fish, but never since.
So you didn't travel to Yemen, though?
No, unfortunately not. I would love to have done. I spent quite a lot of time in Jordan over the years. So I know the sort of people and sort of place quite well. And I had it very clearly in my head. No, I really wish we could have filmed in the Yemen, but it became very unsafe very quickly. Which when I started adapting the book, it wasn't actually. But it over the couple of years we took in development, it suddenly became a sort of Al-Qaeda hotbed. So sadly we couldn't go there.
Anything else you're working on?
Apart from Catching Fire, the Hunger Games sequel, I'm adapting the Full Monty for the stage. Now we're deep in a recession. It seemed like the right time to bring it back.
Wasn't it already a musical?
Yeah.
It was a musical, yeah, but it was set in Buffalo and it was quite a free adaptation. How dare they? Completely unacceptable. So I'm setting it back in Sheffield, and it's going to start its tour in Sheffield.
Are you working with a lyricist and musician?
No, it's not going to be a musical. It's going to be a straight play.
Are there any filmmakers that you would help would adapt one of your screenplays or direct one of your screenplays in the future?
Well, I'm talking with Danny at the moment about something else. He's an extraordinary man to work with, and I had really fantastically creative time on 127 hours in Slumdog Millionaire. So I hope, fingers crossed, that we'll be doing something else together when he finally surfaces from the Olympic Games opening ceremony, which is an extraordinary undertaking by the sound of it.
What's your process as a writer? Do you have a set schedule, like 9 to 5 you do some work?
No, I wish. No, it doesn't seem to work like that. It's a mess. I don't maybe think you should write this down. Or I should make up something better. Yes, I wake up at 6 and work for 8 hours and break for black coffee and buffalo shooting. No, you just have to work and work and work, and it's sort of until it gets done. And sometimes it's 6 in the morning, sometimes it's late at night. And I've got 2 kids who are not the least bit interested in my screenwriting career, and they'll interrupt operations at all times, and that's fine. What I always do is I go somewhere on my own for the first 10 days, 2 weeks, and completely immerse myself in the work. And after that, any amount of interruptions and phone calls and kids and stuff is fine. But for about 2 weeks, I need to literally not talk to anyone. And that's when the most important work gets done. And without that, it wouldn't work.
What's usually the project is you discover the book and decided to write the adaptation and get options, or someone ask you, hey, we have an option of this book, so could you write adaptation, or how it works?
Sometimes, yeah, or sometimes I read a book and just get completely captured by it. It sort of depends. It goes all different sorts of ways, really. The thing I'm working on at the moment, adapting, is called Sharp Teeth, and that's a poem. It's an epic poem set in Los Angeles, and it just completely captured me. And it makes no sense to try and adapt an epic poem into a screenplay, but I'm giving it a good shot anyway, just because it's a lot of work. It's years of your life getting a film off the ground. So it has to be something that really, really captures your imagination. Sometimes it's something somebody brings to me or something I find. But it just varies.